Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, ESPR as a driver for integrating PLM and supply chain product compliance. This webinar is together with PDSVISION and Assent. My name is Carolina Hägg, and I will be your moderator and your technical support during this webinar. And presenting today will be Perttu Korpela and Markus Schneider. And a short introduction about us at PDSVISION. We are a global software solution provider, and we offer market-leading and cutting-edge solutions that enable our customers to realize their business value within product development, manufacturing, service, and operations. We at PDSVISION are considered the leading and trusted advisor within the product development sectors. And now I will hand over to Markus Schneider.
Yeah, thank you, Carolina. Hello, everyone. Also welcome from me as representative of Assent. So very few short words also about Assent. Assent is the leading provider in supply chain management when it comes to the sourcing of compliance data, to ESG and sustainability in the supply chain. We are in the market since 12 years. We now have more than 1,000 employees, headquartered in Ottawa, Canada, with a European organization which is headquartered in Amsterdam, with currently around about 100 employees in Europe. The rest of this you get as reference slides, and as we have a packed agenda, I will directly step into the topic. So I'm going to open up with a regulatory background. As we said in the title, it's about ESPR and future trends. So the first question is, of course, what does this acronym ESPR mean? And I'm starting with a little bit of a background on the European Green Deal and how that impacts the European Union industrial strategy. So the European Green Deal, which has been in place since 2019 and has gone now over various stages of more specific measures, you can consider it always to be a combination of various facets in legal governance in Europe. You will always find things like, I got a beeping sound here in the background. Okay, it's the chat message. So sorry. You always have a set of instruments that describe a certain context. What's always in there is the question of how do industries industries steer to what is called a sustainable behavior under the European Green Deal. The Green Deal's objective, in a very few shorts, is to establish Europe as a sustainable marketplace. That means eco-friendly, that means with carbon neutrality in mind, that means with resource conservation in mind, that means a toxic-free environment, etc., etc. So there is different instruments in that. The one is, for example, the taxonomy, which is about incentivizing behavior. So whenever industries or participants actors in the market behave in a way that should be considered positive, it must be ensured that financial flow is safeguarded for them and sustained as well over a long term. That's what the taxonomy is for. On the other hand, we have the instruments for enforcement, which are, for example, the Eco-Crime Directive and similar things, which are caring about the questions of non-compliance in law. We have then general frameworks that describe the behavior of market participants, corporate due diligence, so to say. There is the upcoming regulation, directive on corporate sustainability, the CSDDD directive, and the CSRD, which is for the reporting into the taxonomy. And then we have single instruments, and one of those will be the upcoming Ecodesign for Sustainable Products regulation. That is, so to say, the context in all these laws and lawmaking that must be cohesive and woven into each other. So I will not go into the details of all the instruments of the European Green Deal. It's simply about the Ecodesign for Sustainable Products regulation, which is part of the Sustainable Products Initiative as a consequence of the European Green Deal. It's a proposal for a new regulation published in March 2020 and shall establish a framework, and that's important, to improve the environmental sustainability of products. There are lots of aspects that go into the categorization of what sustainability is, and some of these are affecting the way that products are designed in regard to choice of material, choice of suppliers, choice of substances indirectly, and the question about how this can be collected, put forth into what is called a digital twin, and be represented in public data space. So requirements relate to, and then just focus on some, the reusability of products. So the way that you design products, that they can, or parts of them can be reused at a later stage in their product life cycles. It's about upgradability, repairability, and maintenance. So we all know that having today a smartphone means if the battery is broken, the smartphone is done. That is something which should be avoided in future, because the battery is a component within the smartphone that should be replaceable, or it should be replaced by a larger volume or improved battery in future. It's also about understanding about the substances of concern in products, and that's a little bit extending the scope of what you are used to when you're doing material compliance. For example, in the context of REACH, where it's always about hazardous substances, substances of very high concern, or banned chemistry like under RoHS. Substances of concern can mean everything. It's not yet defined. It could, for example, also mean scarce resources like silver becoming subject to reporting and subject to listing. It's reporting about the product energy and resource efficiency, about the content of recycling, recycled material, and so forth and so forth. It will repeal, or the Ecodesign Framework Directive that you all know of will be repealed. That has a lot of implications. I don't think it's the place to talk about all the implications, but the Ecodesign Directive for those companies that applied it or had to apply it also means a lot of internal processes, a lot of processes associated with software, with the certification, etc., could be affected by the ESPR proposal. The scope of the ESPR is any physical durable good, and that includes, and that's also important to note, anything that is within that physical good, which is a subpart, a component, an intermediate product in there. While the ESPR sets a framework, it's important to note that once this framework is established, all the product specifics, all the specific implementations of the ESPR regarding subsets of products or industrial verticals, they will be created as so-called delegated acts. And that is important because that's a measure or a means of the European Commission to make law within the scope of such a framework regulation without a parliament or council-based process. So it's the European Commission that will create a delegated act which expresses the specificities of, for example, a ESPR or digital product passport related to, let's say, smartphones, and that will be in place in a relative short time. I'll talk about that in a minute. One of the provisions that is always to be kept in mind is Article 1.8, because this clearly states that products will only be allowed to be placed on the market if a product passport is available. So again, the no data, no market principle, but this time associated with something which is, so to say, tangible and has a very deep meaning in regard of describing the product for the end consumer, for the authorities, etc. So the concept behind is that as part of the ESPR, a digital product passport must accompany each product and in providing information about the product's environmental sustainability in order to enable customers to make informed choices, to provide transparency about the life cycle and impacts of the products on the environment, And that is also important to support enforcement of all the associated regulatory requirements by providing means and data for the authorities to do checks and controls. I'll talk about that in a minute. So what shall it be and how shall it be and what is the content of it? Well, it's a structured collection that's important. It's linked to a system, which is or to a number of systems, but one of them very notably, the so-called ICSMS, which is a central registry maintained by the European Commission, which has two sides, one public facing, which is about a product and its non-compliance issues, very simple, and internally facing, which gives all the information that is required to do enforcement, to identify those companies that, or those products first, that are having issues with compliance, to identify the responsible persons, to identify whether there was non-compliance issues before. And this information is then shared to the national authorities as well, and shareable to the national authorities as well, which will definitely ease enforcement. The content of the DPP, the Digital Product Passport, which is the core of the ESPR, is to contain a lot of information on substances of concern in the product, information on the performance, information for consumers, which is always important, so that they understand how they can sustainably use as well their product. So getting a smartphone will mean that a smartphone digital product passport will, me as a consumer, exactly tell how this smartphone can be upgraded, how a battery can be replaced, what substances are in there, what alternatives might potentially exist, etc., etc. And that product as a digital twin will have a unique product identifier, which will be valid and unique all over Europe. It will be connected to a data carrier, to the digital space, with a QR code, which is placed on the device itself. Some more content as set out in Annex 3. I will not go over each and any of them, but there is a lot of information on there that will help to better identify the original manufacturers of items and products purchased, respectively, being on the market. With that having said, that was a very quick introduction into the ESPR and the associated digital product passport. I'm handing now over to Perttu, because the question of the DPP is, of course, data, and the manufacturer is the one that has to provide the data. And where is data found? Perttu will tell you.
Yes, thank you, Markus. My name is Perttu Korpela, and I work as a business director for PLM at PDSVISION. And I will be telling you how PLM can help addressing those points that Markus just mentioned in the ESPR context, and the data points specifically that you can start managing in PLM to make sure that you can fulfill those ESPR and demands. So in a way, the data points are coming from the list of requirements that Markus just discussed earlier in his slides. So we have the requirements for the product manufacturers about the product data as a bullet point list, like we saw. And we have there some key points there, like how much do we have the recycled content in our product? What are the processes that are needed to build, manufacture, serve, or decommission a product in a market? What is the substances, chemical substances of a product, as it's already today been recorded at many times, but now it's been taken one step further. And I marked the chemical substances as in a bold in this list, because it's good to see that the companies who are already today taking this seriously and managing that data together with their product data in one single system, they are one step closer in fulfilling the upcoming ESPR regulation. The digital passport, as Markus explained, that requires tracking of each unique product ID, the variant ID to be exact, and quite high level of detail. The lower parts of the product structure need to be captured for each and every product variant that we are generating and putting into the market. And in that data that we are providing for that product variant, we are releasing data about the product performance, the energy consumption, weight of it, power output, kind of implicitly the efficiency of the product with other product data that is relevant for consumer of that or user of the product. Some of these mentioned data points, they are additional data layers on the top of the current product part structures that we are managing, and they need to be kept up to date. So in essence, I think we can draw equal signs from the digital product passport to product's digital twin. But building a digital twin, that's easier said than done, as I will explain in my following slides. One good reason for that is that in real life, products are actually quite complex. If we are looking at an example here in a slide, we see a typical product that engineering has created as design ready. To capture and the product itself, it includes embedded software and electronics, which by definition already increases the complexity of the product information or product data connected to it. It's not only mechanical, as you might think in the beginning. But to capture the whole product structure, what we call in this slide as an end product item, we need to amend the engineering structure with the product packaging information and also with the items that have been consumed during the manufacturing phases of our product. That builds up our complete end product item. And every change in that product structure at any level need to be captured and new variant needed to be created. And hence there is a word variant in the parentheses in this slide. So there need to be a way to generate the variant structures, capture them, generate the variant IDs for those companies at least who have a lot of variability in their products. And they need to be then published to the EU databases later on. But in addition to capture all the data points that were mentioned in Markus's presentation, we need to know the suppliers of our parts, the materials that we or our suppliers are currently using. And we need to collect the compliance declarations and certifications and other documentation, preferably in one system. For recycling, refurbishing, and decommissioning of the products, we need to create different product views for it. And we need to create the process documentation that tells the service engineers or the consumers how to recycle or serve our product. And all that documentation that need to be kept up to date, of course. The items in these views, they are created in the engineering in the beginning of the design stage, but this structure or view that is specific for that use case and that is created separate as a separate view for that product. And as we know, products do change, so PLM helps in that sense that we can have a systematic change management process supported by a PLM system, that we can make sure that our documentation both upstream and downstream is kept up to date. And one of those data points or data that we need to keep up to date is the performance characteristics of our products. That data is quite often today managed in a separate product information databases, and that might well be so that it will be maintained in another system also in future. But the PLM processes, they need to be accommodating that those data points are also kept up to date when products do change. And then we have the requirements for the product. So we need to have links from the original requirements, environmental requirements or other sort of requirements coming from authorities or from markets, from customers to our product data. We need to trace it back afterwards. And if we speak more about the requirements and their management, this picture shows how we can have requirements trees that captures the environmental authority requirements, the functional requirements as mentioned to each other, and the parts in different product structure views that we have created. So when we are looking at a certain part, as an example in the service stage, we can trace it back. Why did we use certain material for that part when it's been put back in the recycling? And PLM can have those associative traceability links from service parts to the original environmental regulation that made us to create that part a certain way or using certain materials, or in any other view, manufacturing or maintenance views as well. So with that all said, we can see that amounts of data is growing. We need to manage it in a systematic way, and we need to support the product data throughout its full life cycle. And digital product passport, as we heard, that's synonym in a way for a digital twin of a product. So there is one system that is built for this sort of data management from ground up, and that's PLM. That's designed for that sort of use cases and supporting processes and documentations throughout the product lifecycle, from design to material sourcing, manufacturing, etc. So what companies need to make sure when they are selecting a PLM system, that it can be scaled from engineering to the downstream operations to the manufacturing supply chain and servicing of them. And we at PDSVISION, we know that Windchill is one of those PLMs that can do that, and we have done that in a number of cases with our customers already. So that was about the data points, and next we will be hearing more from Markus about high quality data sourcing in supply chain and how that can help companies.
Yeah. So thank you, Perttu. Yeah, as you heard, there's a lot of data point that in a PLM system can be managed and are required for the digital twin and to establish the digital product passport. A lot of these data points, though, they are covered in the supply chain. They are part of the product documentation that is required from your suppliers, from the compliance information required from your suppliers, from the corporate information from your suppliers, and their preceding supply chain. So it's all upstream. That has to be responded to. And for such upstream outreach, supply chain outreach, programs are required. Now, I've taken this one here to simply illuminate how much there is already today that must be addressed. And many of these regulatory trade compliance and ESG topics, they will be flowing into the ESPR requirements, and thus become requirements, at least some of them, for the digital product passport. When setting up a compliance, a supply chain outreach program, there are some things that must be considered. The one is how to identify the data that is required to talk with the supply chain. When talking with the supply chain must be educated. They must be knowledgeable of what data is to be gathered. Important here is we're not only talking with European suppliers, we're talking with global suppliers. We're talking with suppliers from language and cultural regions where approaches, as we have them, for example, in Europe, are not necessarily common, where the legal language that is the base for requesting and reaching out is not known, and where the legality behind that language is not applicable, so it's only a business need. So explaining to suppliers when reaching out and maintaining a constant dialogue with them is of essentiality. It's all about a partnership approach, and it's about a partnership approach that is very demanding because there's such a lot of data points to be gathered. Once you have gathered all those data points, they are needed for, or they must be reintegrated into a PLM system. In our case, so that the full product view can be represented then in the PLM, including the data from the supply chain. That's how we at Assent are doing it, and how we envision that any company shall set up their processes if they should be mature. So expertise, communication, collaborative approach with the suppliers, reaching out on education. Once these data are collected, it's essential that the data process or the program which you employ to reach out to the supply chain ensures that that data is also again fetched back into the PLM system. I have done this here, how we do this as Assent. Reaching out into the supply chain will collect a lot of data. These are pertaining to parts, their subparts, articles in them. This includes questions of chemical compliance. This includes questions of trade compliance, is ESG questions. This will in future include questions which are to be addressed in the delegated acts of the ESPR describing product-related digital product passports and their data points. That's how it then will look. So you got, for example, if you have our manufacturer of a flat screen monitor, these are the parts and their subparts and the articles in there. And the information that you get back then from the supply chain is all about the compliance of those parts in that case here. So we have here a look that is focusing on chemical compliance. Other views, other information, of course, will be provided back in the same way. So now coming back to the ESPR, because I guess that's something that's important for, not I guess, this is the most important thing for all of the companies is, so when does it start? I said it's a proposal. When does it start? Honestly spoken, it should start as soon as possible, as soon as we know the specific requirements. But setting up processes and preparing is even more urgent. Why? You can see the estimates here. We're currently around about here, Q4 2020, where the trilogue with Council and Parliament should be about to start. Potentially, it's a little bit deferred to the beginning of the next year, which then will turn into a time schedule which should steer for an adoption round about Q4 23. That's the planning and based on the figures that the European Commission has proposed. So Q4 23 is planned adoption of the ESPR itself. That's the framework regulation. And then we have the implementation period. We'll say the period in which time all the delegated acts shall be created and pushed forward by the Commission. Now, the Delegated Act, I said that in the beginning, is a very special vehicle because it allows the Commission to create legal requirements, law, as long as it specifies and doesn't override provisions set forth in the framework. For example, a digital passport requirement for a smartphone. This can be done in a very short time frame because they will only push a proposal. They will have a short public consultation on the proposal. And after that short public consultation, it will be finalized and published unless in a very short period of time, there wasn't a majority veto from either council or parliament. And that's the only place where council and parliament are actually involved in that discussion. So if there is no veto, it will become law very quickly. The plan of the Commission is to push forward in that period from 23 to 26 I say a lot of these, respectively, all of the required digital product passports, delegated acts. That means after a certain grace period that we expect a full application of the ESPR, including all the delegated acts, around about Q1 27. Potentially it's end of 27, but that's soon. Because if you look at the product or design life cycle of products, at the amount of data that is to be sourced, because it all includes, as I said, data from the supply chain, that is a necessity for the digital product passport to work, because it's all about the parts in them, the reusability, the upgradability, etc., etc. This is a very short time frame to adopt to these new requirements. So plan and stay focused on Q1, Q2, Q3, 27. And keep in mind, and I'm referring now to the beginning, that it's not only the ESPR, also the revisions of, for example, the Ecocrime Directive, the institutionalization of the audit authority of ECHA, and other enforcement measurements make clear that the ESPR will not only be released to public, but also framed with a further set of incentivizing and enforcement as set forth in the requirements of the expressed in the Green Deal. So it's not a singular activity that happens here. It's all targeted at a stricter lawmaking. So which actions can be taken now? Timely preparation is key, as I said. Prepare your supply chain. What we're doing today is basically starting to prepare the supply chain, because it's about spreading the knowledge, making the supply chain understand in Europe, but also globally, that new requirements are coming up, that a new target and new targeted documentation form is to be expected, that enforcement becomes more and more a practice in Europe when it comes to lawmaking and governance around sustainability, etc. Start setting up the right contractual agreements so that even in your contract language, ESPR and similar such requirements are covered. They are not just incidentally in a communication, they are covered from the beginning. And of course, improve knowledge, engage in workshops, and engage, and that's also important, in advocacy. Become and act as part of industry associations, form collaborations with your peers, join the UN Global Compact Network. A plethora of options exists here. That is important because you still have the option to steer idea making also in the Commission. There will be consultations. These will be short. You must be prepared. Yeah, very specifically then for companies, think of having the whole compliance process more strategized in terms of a central process, a central data store. And that's why we're talking about PLM today as well, because the question is, where are the data stores and the data points and the processes that will enable internal understanding of the requirements of the ESPR and associated legislation? Where are the data points around which to discuss? These are all product related, as the whole legislation is product related. And with that having said, I'm going back, handing over again back to Perttu to show concrete measures of what PLM can do here.
Right, thank you, Markus. Yeah, I will be maybe adding some more bullets to Markus' presentation, why it's a good idea to start already today taking actions on the PLM side. And in my opinion, well, I will be telling you about that, okay, we heard that it's some years from now that the ESPR is in full effect. So why should we start working and collecting data and working that way already today? And in my opinion, the good news is that being sustainable actually makes companies efficient, and the same challenges, same processes, same action measures. They drive both the targets at the same time, and PLM can help on both of those. So if we start from the carbon dioxide footprint that companies will need to be able to follow up and report, 70% of the emissions of a product, that's decided very early stages of the product life cycle, meaning in the engineering and product creation. So putting efforts into those processes and product creation will have a big impact in the end. Of course, supply chain and manufacturing, they will have an impact on these too, but many of the decisions, they have already been made during the product R&D and engineering stages of the product. Being efficient, that means that we are producing less waste and scrap. That's not only economically wise, but it's good for all of us environmentally. So putting in measures, processes again, that drives good quality, both in product and manufacturing quality, that makes us sustainable in a long run. And a quality is for sure a process that the PLM can have a big impact on. So both the quality processes, but also the quality documentation. PLM, of course, is a system that has a big impact how good companies are with their quality initiatives. So some practical samples in the engineering stage that will affect on our sustainability. So the material selection, as Markus mentioned earlier, that's one of the key decisions that we are making in the engineering. We need to know how eco-friendly are our materials and items. Where are we buying them or sourcing them from? Do we buy them from reputable vendors, or yeah, what's the origin of them to start with? Waste reduction for the product. So that was one of the points in the Ecodesign directive, is that target to reduce waste. So we need to be able to use more recycled materials in our products, and knowing that how much of our product is being built using recycled materials versus virgin materials, that's one thing that we need to be able to track down. And if we are not using recycled materials, we need to know why is that, and what was the reason why it need to be built using the virgin materials, and the product's recyclability in general. How good is our product from the recycling point of view? Reuse is a good engineering practice and PLM practice, and PLM helps us reusing good parts, materials, suppliers that we already have sourced by enforcing taxonomy and classification of all that, and having the information in one system where it can easily be found. So in essence, PLM makes sure that the wheel is not reinvented in every iteration, and it reduces the risk that we are using non-approved parts, non-approved vendors, or the materials that we are not certain about. In supplier management side, as you saw in Markus' slide, there was a mention of supplier management in Windchill. That is a functionality in Windchill that we can actually connect the suppliers to our product information. So we know who are the suppliers in the PLM system. And if we only have one supplier for a part, that we at least have alternative parts for those parts that we only have one source. If something happened with that certain supplier from the availability or from the compliance point of view, again, a good business practice to have multiple sources or multiple alternatives for as many parts as possible. So all this that I'm mentioning here, that's good from the business point of view in the challenging business climate that we are today operating. We all have heard the news about the energy and the supply chain challenges that the companies are facing. So what is the good news is that addressing those areas, that by side effect, we get our products to become more sustainable. We start building that sort of measures and data points, collecting that sort of data that will help us in the ESPR regards as well. So to summarize, why should we start already today and why should we not wait? So in essence, PLM helps us with our digital transformation initiatives. PLM is a system that helps us to make sure that our digital house is in order. We have one single source of truth for very complex product data, and including suppliers, materials, different views of the product structures. And if we go through our digital transformation in a way that we include the supply chain management, as Markus also explained earlier, into those efforts, that gives us big efficiency gains. And if we are efficient, that in the end makes us at the same time also more sustainable. So I would say that it makes sense to start already today, because that will give us big benefits already today, not in 5 years' time. Plus, then we are also better prepared for the Ecodesign directive in a good time. Maybe we are ahead of our competitors when we start doing it already today. And for sure, then we will not have any risk of product introduction delays or withdrawals from the market when we are addressing these data points and processes already today. So with that, I want to thank you from my point of view, all of you listening in. And I think it's over to Carolina now if we have any questions in the QA or in chat.
Yes, we do. So we will begin with a question from Louise. In the question to the Ecodesign on 1st July 2023, how do you interpret placed on the market when a product is produced outside the EU and imported into the EU? In this timeline, when is the product placed on the market?
Yeah, it's if I may take over, it's the same question on duty and duty holders that is, for example, addressed under REACH, under the Waste Framework Directive, etc. So the activity of placing something on the market is, for example, importing. It's also distribution, or it's manufacturing and then selling. So pretty much aligned to my understanding and from what I read in the proposal with what is regulated under Waste Framework Directive, REACH, and similar regulations, where placing in the market is a central and core term.
And the next question from Ines: will this be applied to products developed by small businesses, thinking, for example, clothing in small batches?
Yeah, that's unfortunately, there is no exemption currently foreseen in the framework regulation. But the framework regulation always has a specific requirement for the delegated acts, specifying digital passport requirements for certain types of products or industries, and their appropriateness, effectiveness of measures is of course a question. Whether this will also mean that there is an exemption or a general exemption for handcrafted small articles, for example, for a tourist shop somewhere that are only doing like 20 t-shirts, hand knitted, I cannot tell. I wouldn't honestly expect that, as the idea behind would be that you have a supply chain where the wool, for example, or the base materials, they are also associated with product passport relevant information. So you could relatively easily understand a product passport related to those items. But you are right with your question and your concern. This is a typical example of legislation which understands businesses and actors only from a certain size. It's the same as with, for example, REACH, and for small companies that are only doing surface treatment, or that are manufacturing handcrafted small plastic articles. For them, it's also a big challenge, and they're somewhat affected negatively there.
And we have a next question here from Kurt. Expected focus commission, is it B2C, B2B, for example?
It's placing products on the market. Focus, I don't know the focus commission, B2C, B2B. Well, the digital product passport is a requirement, disregarding of the question whether it's B2C or B2B. So for end consumer products, the same as for B2C, because it states, as you have seen, products and parts and components thereof. So if you're just a manufacturer of parts, B2C, for the use in later products, B2C or B2B, you're affected as well.
And here we have a question from Sergio. In general, the supply chain with purchases is managed by means of the ERP. How do you view the role of ERP in compliance management together with the role of PLM in product lifecycle management?
Right. If I take that one, that's quite common today that the compliance data or the material data is managed in an ERP system, but we see it as if it's put in the same place where the product data is, that makes it visible for the whole enterprise in a better way and also earlier in the product life cycle. So when it's visible for our product engineering and R&D, then they can make those decisions that which materials to use, which parts to choose, which suppliers are being used. So since PLM can take that role, why wouldn't? But of course, every company is different and has a different approach, and there is different legacy systems in place. But PLM for sure can put a lot of value if it's done in a PLM side.
Yeah, I would add to that as it is the Ecodesign for sustainable products regulation, it's targeted at the design and inception life cycle of a product, and that typically happens around PLM. So it's not about instrumentalization of your manufacturing process when everything is designed, etc. That's also part of it, but it's at an early stage of decision making where typically the engineer is involved rather than anyone else, and the PLM is the engineer system. Correct me if I'm wrong, Perttu.
No, in essence, it's seen as an engineering system many times. So of course, it can span to the production engineering and all of the other processes too. But definitely, engineering is the heavy user group of a PLM system. And as you say, if the data is made visible for them, then they can make those decisions as set in the product design and early enough so that we are not in late when we are introducing something to the market and then start thinking about these Ecodesign directive requirements. They should be done already very early on, as you say.
Okay, and we have a next question. Do you expect any update of Ecodesign requirements before the 1st of July 2023?
If referring to the existing Ecodesign directive, I must happily say I don't know. If talking about the update of the proposal, yes, we expect changes to that, of course, because there will be the trilogue between Commission, Parliament, and Council, and of course there will be questioning, challenging. And one of the things that could be challenged is the question, for example, from Ines, how to treat those small companies in the market that don't have the IT capacities and are just producing, let's say, tourist goods or small batches, handcrafted, or are just very small manufacturers of very small specific equipments for single purposes. These are challenges that will happen and will have to be addressed.
And we have two final questions here. We heard about materials and suppliers in context of PLM. Is it common to manage those in PLM?
Right. I think that was addressed in the previous question also, that as it is today, quite often it is in ERP system, that information about the suppliers. But the good practice moving forward with all the requirements from the ESPR is to push it earlier on to the product life cycle and the decision makers of the product. As I explained, 70% of the decisions affecting to the end result are done in the engineering, so that information that is crucial, yes, it should be visible early in the design stages and the whole enterprise. So today, not that common, but in the future, I would see that it's coming more and more common.
And the final question, ESPR and enforcement. I heard the ICSMS database for enforcement. Can you tell me about its purpose?
Yep, I'll take that with it. It's good at dual purpose. So the ICSMS actually is already existing. It's an informational portal from the internal market, industry, entrepreneurship, and SME part of the commission. It's on the one side targeted at consumers, being enabled to search for product information and authorities in regard to violation of compliance. That there's only a very small subset there, but the main purpose of it is to enable authorities to simply understand about a product, its documented properties, the associated company, their documented properties, the one responsible person for that, and to understand whether there have been any violations in regard to compliance regarding that product, regarding that company before, what has been done, where the mitigating actions, etc., etc. It serves as a central information store for a new provision also under REACH, for example, as well as the ESPR, which is a kind of an enforcement network and auditing authority that or agency that ECHA shall provide, which is simply a shared pool of resources where national enforcement bodies can get back to and request their support. And the purpose is to centralize and criterialize all the requirements set forth, for example, in the market surveillance directive, and to understand whether help understanding, in addition to product and companies, also about the measurements of national authorities and their adequateness. So it's a database that's a central data store for understanding effectiveness of enforcement, so to say, and to steering enforcement. It's not that it's all public in a shame and blame manner. So it's not about publishing company ABC is constantly violating regulation XYZ. But if you want to look whether a product that you purchase has some issues, you definitely can find things there.
Excellent. So thank you everybody who participated in this webinar. And thank you, Marcus and Perttu, for a fantastic presentation.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. It was my pleasure.
It was a pleasure. Yeah. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Nice weekend.